Dalharn was not the kind of city that appeared in travel brochures. It didn't boast neon skylines or cobbled old towns. It was a place caught between eras, too forgotten to be modern, too stubborn to be ruined. The buildings bore the wear of decades, windows smudged by the soot of forgotten industry, bricks softened by endless drizzle. It rained often in Dalharn. Not the dramatic storms of coastal towns, but a low, ceaseless drizzle that blurred edges and muted colors. Everything seemed quieter in the rain. Naveen liked the quiet. He lived on the top floor of a once grand row house, its bones creaking under the weight of memory. The balcony outside his window overlooked a rusting set of train tracks that hadn't seen a train in years. He spent most of his evenings there, legs stretched out, an untouched violin resting in his lap like a sleeping bird. Some nights he held it for hours and never played a single note. That Sunday, the rain had started early, misting the windows and washing over the cracked pavement below. Naveen sat with a blanket wrapped loosely around his shoulders. His eyes followed the soft descent of the drops, hypnotized by their rhythm. He liked the way rain smothered the city's sound, no honking, no shouting, just the occasional echo of footsteps if someone dared to be out. That's when he saw her. She came around the corner with a photographer's eye. Tall boots, wet cuffs, and a battered satchel bouncing against her hip. She carried an umbrella, but most of her hair had escaped its shelter, slick and curling against her cheeks. A camera hung from her neck, its lens pointed lazily at the ground until something caught her interest. She paused beneath a flickering streetlight and looked up at the row houses. Then her eyes met his. It wasn't long, a passing glance, a shared second, but it lasted. She didn't smile. Neither did he. And then she walked on. Naveen blinked. The violin slipped slightly from his lap. He didn't know her name. He wasn't even sure she'd seen him at all. But something settled in his chest that hadn't been there in months, a faint, flickering curiosity. Mira was soaked by the time she reached the end of Glass Street, but she didn't mind. Her boots squelched slightly with each step, and the camera strap had chafed the side of her neck, but she kept going. She was chasing the ghost of a rumor, an old mural tucked away under the railway bridge, painted by a grieving lover decades ago. No one remembered the full story. That was part of the charm. She hadn't come to Dalharn for a story. She'd come to forget. Her last job had been in Prague. Before that, Seoul. Before that, Nairobi. Each place had been an escape, a pivot, a breath before the plunge into the next. But this place? It was different. There was no headline here. Just cold rain, quiet corners, and the chance to disappear. But she kept thinking about the man on the balcony. There'd been something haunting in the way he sat, like a statue holding something fragile. His face had been shadowed by the overhang, but she remembered the outline of his shoulders, the way he cradled the violin as if afraid to wake it. Maybe he was part of the story too. The next morning, the rain returned, steady and endless. Mira found herself back on Glass Street. She told herself she was looking for new angles of the mural. That she needed shots of the street for context. But her eyes flicked up as she passed the same building. The balcony was empty. She took a picture anyway. Inside the corner cafe, she sipped bitter coffee and flipped through the shots on her camera. Her fingers paused on the one with the shadowed balcony. Something in the framing made her chest tighten. She zoomed in, just bricks and shadows. Still, it pulled at something inside her. The bell over the cafe door rang. She didn't look up at first. But then a whisper of movement caught her eye. Across the room, the man from the balcony stood by the counter, hands tucked in his coat pockets. He didn't order. Just waited while the barista boxed something up, a bagel, maybe. Then he turned. Their eyes met again. Still no smile. Still that same quiet wait. But he nodded. Just once. She blinked in surprise. When she looked again, he was gone. 2 days later, they shared their first words. It happened near dusk. Mira had followed the light to a row of broken window shops, capturing the way the fading sun bounced off the puddles. She turned a corner, and there he was again. Leaning against the doorway of a bookstore. Closed sign hanging slightly crooked behind the glass. "You keep finding the quiet places," he said. His voice was lower than she expected. Not gravelly, but firm, like something carved from stillness. Mira smiled for the first time in days. "So do you." He nodded. "Dalharn doesn't offer much else. I like that about it." He studied her for a moment. "You're not from here." "No." A pause. "I'm Mira." "Naveen." Another silence, but this one was easier. The kind you could rest in. They didn't plan to see each other again. But the city had other ideas. She started bringing her camera to the same cafe he visited. Sometimes they sat in silence. Sometimes they spoke. Not about big things, never about heartbreak, or loss, or what brought them to a city that had stopped changing. But about books. Music. The way the mural's paint was fading into the stone. "You used to play," she said once. He nodded. "A long time ago." "Why'd you stop?" Naveen looked out the window, eyes distant. "Because the last time I played, it was at my brother's funeral." Mira didn't reply. She didn't need to. Her silence said enough. "I'm sorry," she whispered finally. "So am I." Later, she told him about her ex. A man she'd loved too hard. One who couldn't handle the woman she became behind the camera. He never raised his voice. He just stopped speaking altogether. Until silence turned into a decision. And she left. "You don't strike me as someone who runs," Naveen said. "I don't," she said. "Not usually." "Then maybe you're not running," he said. "Maybe you're just walking it off." One day, the rain stopped. For the first time since her arrival, the clouds pulled back, revealing a pale, uncertain sun. Mira found herself beneath the railway bridge again, staring up at the mural. The lovers were there, wings and fire intertwined, mid-fall. "I've always hated this story," she said aloud. Naveen stepped up beside her. "You said you were following it." "I was. But now I think, it's just sad. Like they didn't have a choice." "Or maybe they did," he said. "And they chose wrong." They looked at each other. The pause between them was heavier now. Filled with unspoken things. "I want to hear you play," she said suddenly. Naveen stiffened. "I don't. Not for anyone else. Just me." He looked down. "Why?" "Because I think your silence has music in it. And I want to hear what it sounds like." He didn't say yes. But he didn't walk away either. That night, she returned to his building. He opened the door before she knocked. The violin case was already open on the table. A single lamp lit the room. They didn't speak. She sat on the floor, camera beside her. Waiting. Naveen stood, fingers trembling, then steadied. He raised the violin. The first note was raw. Shaky. The second was better. By the third, Mira was crying. He played a song with no name. One made of rain and grief and slow-burning hope. When it ended, the silence that followed was the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. "Thank you," she whispered. Naveen sat beside her. "You were right. I was still holding on to something." She looked at him, eyes red. "And now? I'm letting go." They didn't kiss. Not yet. But his fingers found hers. And for the first time in months, Mira didn't feel like she was running. She felt like she was finally home. The village of Kayer Hollow sat folded into the hills like a secret. Mist rolled across its narrow streets every morning, trailing through ivy-wrapped chimneys and crumbling stone fences. And at the edge of the village, beyond the rusting gate that no one opened anymore, lay a lake. It had no official name, just whispers, the widow's mirror. Deep and still. Locals said it never rippled, never froze, and never reflected the sky quite right. Children told ghost stories about voices in the fog. Adults kept their distance and shook their heads when strangers asked. Luca had grown up here. He knew the stories. Knew them too well. His bookshop sat on the road facing the lake, dusty windows, a faded sign that read Cair Hollow Antiquities and Rare Writings. Most days, no one came in. That suited Luca fine. He was a man of few words, even fewer friends, and a past heavy enough to keep him still. Each morning, he brewed black tea with clove, flipped the sign to open, and unlocked the back door that led to the lake. And every morning, he stood in the threshold, watching the water for a moment longer than necessary. As if waiting. Shahana didn't believe in ghosts. She believed in patterns. And secrets. She arrived in Cair Hollow with 2 suitcases, a cracked leather notebook, and a letter dated August 4, 1893. It had been passed down in her family for generations, wrapped in velvet and rumor. A woman named Anjali, her great-great-grandmother, had lived in this very village once. She'd fallen in love with a man no one remembered. He drowned in the lake. She disappeared shortly after. All that remained was the letter. It wasn't written in any known language. Shahana had spent years decoding pieces of it, fragments of symbols and words that didn't belong to any common tongue. But 2 words were clear: don't forget. Shahana didn't forget. She couldn't. The letter had haunted her. Not because it was mysterious, but because it felt unfinished. Like the final page of a book had been torn out just before the truth. And now she was here. At the widow's mirror. Looking for answers. She found Luca's shop by accident. It was the smell that drew her in, cedar and dust and something faintly herbal. Inside, the air was warm, and the light was gold. Shelves leaned like tired soldiers, books stacked in unsteady towers. A cat slept on the counter, one eye open. Luca stood behind the register, sleeves rolled to his elbows, glasses perched on the end of his nose. He looked up as the bell chimed. He had the kind of face built for silence, strong jaw, tired eyes, a mouth that seemed reluctant to speak. "Can I help you?" he asked, voice deep but soft. "I'm looking for local records," she said. "Anything from the 1800s. Diaries, letters, town reports." He studied her a moment. "You won't find much." "Why not?" "There was a fire in the old archive," he said. "Almost everything before 1900 was lost." Shahana's heart sank. Of course it was. He watched her closely. "You researching something?" Shahana hesitated. People didn't usually take her seriously when she mentioned decoding encrypted family heirlooms connected to drowned lovers. But something about Luca made her want to tell the truth. "I think my ancestor lived here," she said. "And I think her story was buried." Luca's brow lifted slightly. "Everyone's story gets buried eventually. But some are worth digging up," she said. That made him pause. For just a moment, something flickered in his eyes. "Come back tomorrow," he said. "I'll see what I can find." Shahana returned the next morning. He had 3 old boxes waiting for her on a side table, along with fresh tea and a small plate of shortbread. "These were from a private estate," he said. "Belonged to a family who left in 1912. No one's read through them in years." She smiled. "Thank you. I'm not doing this for you," Luca said, almost too quickly. "I'm doing it for the truth." But he didn't walk away. Instead, he sat beside her and helped her open the first box. Over the next week, they worked in silence. Together. She took notes. He brewed tea. The cat, now named Fig after a 14th-century poet, became her shadow. They read old weather reports, fragments of sermons, faded letters with ink smudged by time. Nothing useful. Nothing about Anjali. Still, Shahana kept going. Every evening she walked down to the lake. Every evening she whispered to the water, hoping it might whisper back. Luca sometimes watched her from his shop. He didn't know why he cared. Maybe it was her persistence. Maybe it was the way she talked about lost things like they still mattered. Maybe it was the way her eyes never stopped searching. On the 8th day, they found something. It was tucked inside a ledger, a single page folded tightly and slid between two accounts. It was a letter. Handwritten. In the same strange script as the one Shahana had brought with her. Her hands shook as she opened it. "This is the same code," she said breathlessly. "It has to be from the same person." Luca leaned over her shoulder. He didn't understand the symbols. But he understood her excitement. "You can read it?" "Some," she said. "It'll take time." He watched her copy the shapes into her notebook. Her fingers moved with reverence. "You look like you're writing a prayer," he said softly. She smiled. "In a way, I am." That night, she dreamed of water. Dark and endless, filled with ink that curled into words she almost understood. A woman stood waist-deep in the lake, hair braided with silver coins, eyes fixed on the sky. She held a locket in her palm. And as she opened it, the dream ended. Shahana woke with her breath caught in her throat. She knew where to go. The next morning, she stood outside Luca's shop with a map and a conviction that felt like gravity. "There's an old cabin on the south edge of the lake," she said. "No one's lived there in decades. But I think that's where she wrote the letter." Luca didn't ask how she knew. He simply nodded and grabbed his coat. They hiked the shoreline in silence. Mist clung to their coats and the ground turned soft underfoot. When they reached the clearing, the cabin was still there, rotting but intact, its porch sunken like a ship. Inside, everything was soaked in dust. But behind the stove, beneath a loose plank in the floor, they found a metal box. And inside it, letters. Dozens of them. Wrapped in cloth, sealed with wax long broken. Every one of them written in the same code. Shahana sat on the floor, stunned. Luca crouched beside her. "Anjali?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "And someone named Elias." She opened one at random. The symbols danced in familiar patterns. Her eyes widened. "This one's about the night he drowned," she said. Luca felt a chill. "Did she kill him?" Shahana shook her head. "She tried to save him. But they were being followed." "By who?" She looked at him. "Her family." That evening, back in the shop, she translated what she could. It was a love story. Coded letters passed between Anjali and Elias, an Indian scholar and a European composer, two people whose families forbade their love. They met in secret. Shared music. Dreamed of fleeing across the sea. But the village turned on them. Rumors spread. And one night, Elias vanished beneath the lake's still surface. His body was never found. Anjali left 2 weeks later. She never returned. "This wasn't just love," Shahana whispered. "They were trying to escape something much bigger. This code, it wasn't just for secrecy. It was protection." Luca didn't speak. He just sat beside her, listening. "You think they ever said goodbye?" he asked. "No," she said softly. "Not properly." Luca's hand brushed hers. He didn't pull away. And neither did she. That night, as rain returned to Care Hollow, Luca played a record, an old, scratched waltz composed by a name he hadn't heard until today, Elias Thornwell. Shahana stood by the window, watching the lake beyond the glass. "Do you think they'd be happy?" she asked. "Knowing we found them?" "I think they'd be grateful," Luca said. "And maybe a little sad." "Why?" "Because we still have to live where they were only dreaming." She turned to him. "I'm tired of dreaming alone." "So am I." Their first kiss was quiet. Not urgent. Not rushed. Just honest. Like the letters beneath the lake. The garden behind St. Moira's hospital wasn't much. Just a square of earth fenced in by crumbling brick, tucked away between the trauma ward and the old chapel. No one really used it anymore. The fountain hadn't worked in years, the stone benches were mossy, and only a few brave flowers bloomed beneath the shadow of the emergency wing. But Kieran loved it there. He came every evening after his shift, still in scrubs, hands scrubbed raw. He never brought his phone. He never talked. He just sat on the third bench from the left, facing a row of stubborn peonies that refused to stop growing. They reminded him of someone. Or maybe they reminded him of who he used to be before the war, before the hospitals, before the silence that followed. He always left before sunset. Always alone. Until the day she arrived. Amaya stepped into the garden like she was stepping onto another planet. She wasn't sure why she'd come. Maybe it was the scent, something faint and familiar. Maybe it was the bench. Maybe it was the name engraved in the stone border, Luce's garden. Something in it pulled at her, like a memory trying to surface through fog. She walked carefully, as though she might disturb something sacred. A breeze lifted her hair, and for a moment, she paused by the fountain. Her fingers brushed the cracked marble. Something warm bloomed in her chest. She couldn't remember why. When she turned, she saw him, tall, slouched slightly, elbows on knees. He didn't stare. Just blinked slowly, as if trying to decide if she was real. Amaya gave him a small nod. She didn't know if she was interrupting. But she didn't leave. Instead, she sat on the bench opposite his. The silence between them lasted 7 visits. He never asked her name. She never asked what he was grieving. But somehow, the ritual formed. Kieran would come, sit, breathe. Amaya would arrive minutes later, usually with a flower in her hand. A lily. A marigold. A peony that looked like the ones beside him. She'd place it gently at the base of the fountain, then sit. They would stay until dusk. Then they would go their separate ways. It wasn't friendship. It was something gentler. Like recognition. On the 8th evening, she spoke. "I used to know this garden," she said, eyes on the dirt. "I think. I don't remember how, but it's like something in me remembers it." Kieran looked at her properly for the first time. Her eyes were the color of warm soil. Her hair was a tumble of soft curls, pinned back with a wooden clip. She wore a pale cardigan despite the heat. "You've been here before?" he asked. She nodded. "Maybe. Or maybe I just want to believe that." He hesitated. "Why don't you remember?" Amaya didn't flinch. "Car accident. 5 months ago. I lost a lot. Memories. Smell. Some feeling in my left arm. I'm sorry. I'm not." He blinked. "I mean, I used to be. But lately, maybe forgetting let me start over. Like I'm not trapped by who I used to be." Kieran nodded slowly. He understood more than she knew. The next day, Amaya brought seeds. "Lavender," she said, kneeling beside the dry patch near the bench. "They used to grow here." Kieran crouched beside her. "You sure they'll survive?" "Nope," she said brightly. "But that's the fun part." He watched as she dug her fingers into the dirt. She didn't use gloves. Just bare hands and soft hums. "What do you do?" he asked. She smiled. Florist. Sort of. I'm relearning everything. Where? There's a shop on Avett Street. Bloom and quiet. My aunt runs it. Took me in after the accident. And you just work there. Learn there, she corrected. Names, sense, what everything means. Did you know peonies symbolize healing? He raised an eyebrow. No. Well, she said, brushing dirt from her palms, now you do. Kieran laughed softly. He didn't do that often. She came every day after that. Sometimes with flowers. Sometimes with stories. Kieran didn't speak much, but he listened. To her quiet wonder, her awkward jokes, her fragmented memories. One day, she showed him her notebook. It was filled with drawings of flowers, scrawled names beside them. This is my new memory, she said, tapping a page. I can't trust the old ones. But these are real. These I made myself. He turned a page. There was a sketch of the garden. His bench. Her peony. A small, careful drawing of a man with tired eyes. That's you, she said softly. I hope that's okay. He looked at her. It was more than okay. One evening, it rained. Hard, sudden summer rain that soaked the benches and turned the garden to mud. Kieran stood at the door, about to leave. But Amaya was already there. Hair dripping, boots caked, hands cupped around a tiny violet. I didn't want the rain to keep me from remembering, she said. He stepped forward, took her elbow, led her under the overhang. You'll catch something, he murmured. I already caught something, she said, teasing. He gave her a sideways glance. Her smile faded slightly. Sorry. That was too much. No, he said quietly. Just surprising. They stood close. Water pattered around them. The garden glistened. You always show up, she said suddenly. Even when I don't expect anyone to. He looked at her. Really looked. You do too. For the first time, she reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers without hesitation. A week later, she didn't come. Kieran waited until nightfall. The bench stayed empty. The next day, she wasn't there either. Or the next. On the third day, he walked to Bloom and quiet. He'd never been. He didn't even know why he went. But the worry clawed at him. The shop was closed. Lights off. A note taped to the glass. Closed due to emergency. Reopening soon. Thank you for your kindness. He didn't know what to do with that. So he went back to the garden. And waited. 5 days later, she returned. Face pale. Bandaged hand. Slower steps. She didn't speak at first. Just sat beside him. He watched her breathe. Her ribs rose shakily, like she was learning how all over again. I had a seizure, she said finally. They think it's connected to the accident. Something they missed. He nodded. Let her speak. I forgot things again, she said. Not all of them. But some. I was scared. I'd forget the garden. You didn't, he said. No, she whispered. I remembered your name. That's how I knew I was okay. He swallowed. You remembered me? She looked at him. You're hard to forget. He felt like crying. Instead, he placed a seed packet in her lap. She smiled through her tears. Marigolds? She asked. Stubborn as hell, he said. Like someone I know. She laughed. Then cried. Then leaned against his shoulder. And for the first time, they stayed past sunset. Spring melted into summer. The garden bloomed. Lavender, marigold, snapdragon. Petals spilled across the ground like memory reborn. Kieran began bringing books. Amaya brought stories. They fell in love gently. Not with declarations, but with gestures. A thermos of tea on rainy days. A pressed flower between pages. A kiss on the cheek when she forgot a name but remembered his voice. One night, under a sky full of stars, she looked up at him and said, "Even if I forget again, promise me you'll stay." He took her face in his hands. "I'll remind you every time." And he did. For all the days that followed. In a garden they made together. In a place memory came home to bloom. The city of New Orleans smelled like fire and sugar. Its streets pulsed with something older than jazz and louder than any parade, a heartbeat born from history, hurricanes, and hymns. It was a city that thrived on resurrection, where ruin bloomed into beauty and every shadow held a story. Theo didn't belong here. He didn't drink, didn't dance, and didn't smile at strangers. He wasn't rude, just quiet. Polished. Haunted. He came to New Orleans on a sabbatical he hadn't asked for. After the collapse of a tower he designed in Paris, after the tragedy that followed, his firm gently told him to disappear for a while. "Clear your mind," they said. Rest. Theo didn't need rest. He needed to forget. And maybe, deep down, he hoped this strange city would bury him in noise. But New Orleans had other plans. Liana danced like she was defying gravity. Long legs, sun-warmed skin, wild curls that moved like smoke. She wore her sorrow like sequins, bright enough to distract from the weight beneath. Most people never saw it. They saw the rhythm, the radiant smile, the way she made a saxophone solo feel like a spell. But the dance was her armor. After losing her brother, her duet partner, her anchor, Liana left Trinidad and came to the city he'd loved. She joined a fading jazz troupe in the French Quarter, one of the few all-black ensembles still holding shows in candlelit backrooms and creaking theaters. Each night, she danced until her muscles burned and her soul grew numb. Each morning, she woke and did it again. She told herself she was healing. But ghosts aren't that easy to outdance. Their first meeting wasn't romantic. Theo stumbled into a jazz bar on accident. It was raining, the kind of southern storm that washed away time. He ducked beneath the wooden sign of the Marigny vault, mostly for shelter. Inside, the air was thick with heat and the scent of brass. The room glowed with soft yellow light, and on stage. She danced. He didn't know her name. Only that her body moved like the music lived inside her bones. Her eyes were closed, but her soul was wide open. The rest of the world fell away. He didn't drink. But that night, he stayed for 2 sets. When the show ended, he left without a word. But the rhythm stayed. 3 nights later, he came back. Same seat. Same storm. This time, he stayed after the performance. As the bar emptied, he sat alone, sketching something on a napkin, arches, shadows, a curved wall shaped like her spinning silhouette. "Is that me?" a voice asked. He looked up. She stood in front of him, sweat still glistening on her collarbone, curls tied back with a red ribbon. She wore a loose tank top and leggings, but somehow still looked like fire. "I didn't mean to," he started. "You don't talk much, do you?" she said, sliding into the seat across from him. He blinked. "No. I like that," she said with a crooked grin. "I'm Theo," he said, offering his hand. "Liana," she replied, shaking it. The warmth of her palm lingered longer than expected. Over the next week, he became a regular. He didn't just come for her dancing anymore. He came for the conversations after, the quiet moments when the bar dimmed and she sat with him, sipping ginger soda, talking about rhythm and grief and the little lies we tell ourselves to survive. "I dance like it's a prayer," she said one night. "To who?" he asked. "To whoever's listening." Theo told her about the tower. How it crumbled during an opening gala. How 3 people died. How he designed the structure, chosen the materials, trusted the math. How do you carry that? She asked gently. He stared at the sketch in front of him. I don't, he said. I run from it. She touched his hand. Maybe stop running. Liana invited him to a rehearsal. He didn't want to intrude, but she insisted. Dance is just architecture in motion, she said. Come see how it moves. He watched her from the back of the dusty hall, arms crossed, mouth dry. Her movements weren't flawless, they were raw, real. She stumbled, swore, laughed, got back up. She danced like she was fighting. And winning. After rehearsal, they sat beneath the street lamp outside the studio. I want to build something here, he said suddenly. She looked at him, eyebrows raised. A studio, he explained. A space for performers. Dancers, musicians. A place that breathes. She smiled. That's the first time you've talked about building since we met. He nodded. I want you to design it with me, she said. He blinked. I'm not a dancer. You see movement, she said. That's all I need. Over the next few months, the studio came to life, on paper first, then slowly in reality. An old carriage house on Chartres Street, abandoned but sturdy. They cleaned it out together, sometimes working in silence, sometimes to the sound of her humming. One night, after painting the far wall, they collapsed onto the dusty floor, laughing at the purple streaks in each other's hair. You're smiling more, she said. You're dancing softer, he replied. She leaned in, kissed his cheek. Ghosts like to dance too, she whispered. He turned his face to hers. And kissed her. Not hurried. Not desperate. Just full of permission. They didn't fall in love quickly. They grew into it. Slow mornings with beignets. Long evenings sketching and stretching. She taught him how to move. He taught her how to still. She showed him the music in pain. He showed her the beauty in structure. But not all ghosts are content to fade. The night before the studio opened, Liana froze mid-dance. She stared at the mirrored wall, eyes wide. Theo caught her as she collapsed. Later, in the emergency room, she whispered through tears, I saw my brother. Theo held her hand. I never said goodbye, she choked. You don't have to, he said. He's part of your rhythm. And she wept in his arms. Opening night was quiet. Just a dozen people, a few candles, a single spotlight. She danced for him. No choreography. Just memory. Just love. Just truth. Theo watched, tears in his eyes. When she finished, he walked to the stage, took her hand. And together, for the first time, he danced. Awkward. Stiff. But real. And in that quiet studio, bathed in music, sweat, and soft light, their ghosts began to rest.